Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast, presented in part by StubHub. Take a night off from Nights In. Find out all the great details for concerts and sporting events and anything else you could buy a ticket for, conveniently located at steelcityunderground.com/tickets. I am your host, Joe Kuzma, and usually you hear my voice or that of my co-host, Brian E. Roach. We are both here today with a special guest. We're going to be talking about Steelers camp and how everything's gone through the first week and get some actual advice from someone who has their boots on the ground. So before I get to all of that, I'd like to welcome my co-host, the Goose to my Maverick, Brian Roach. Brian, how's it going today?
It's a lovely day in South Jersey, as it always is.
No rain. Well, there's plenty of storms rolling through. They're going to hit Steelers training camp, but we're not here to talk about the weather. Actually, we're just here to talk about Steelers training camp. And we have a very special guest with us today for today's show. Somebody who has their boots on the ground, as I said. I think you've been to most of them. Is that right? Mr. Jon Ledyard, tell us everything about yourself, because like I said off the air, I cannot keep track of all of the various projects you're involved in right now.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me. I really appreciate it. This is great stuff, and it has been fun. I've been down, so I've been at most of them so far, and right now I'm doing a number of different projects. I write for FanRagSports.com, covering the NFL and the NFL draft. Also cover the NFL draft for NDTscouting.com. Do a lot of reports and various things for them. And then also host of the Locked On Steelers podcast, and Locked On NFL Draft podcast, which you can find on iTunes, an Audio Boom, and a host of other places that carry podcasts. And then finally, I write covering the Steelers a couple times a month, usually about 6 or 7 times a month. I write articles for Steel City Insider, Scout.com's paid Steelers subscription site. So yeah, just a couple things here and there is where I'm involved.
A couple, that more than two, more than a pair there. You got your hands full. But
yeah.
Hey, that's cool. We're busy too. And obviously you've been there a lot. Me and Brian have gotten out there. We were there the previous weekend. I'll be heading out again and catching a few more practices, as are some people in the staff. But you're on the field. You get to talk with some of the players. And I guess in that regard, based on what you've seen so far, is there someone that maybe Steelers Nation, the fans, should be paying attention to that they haven't been during this training camp?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know who everyone's, been focused on. I think there's been a lot written on Justin Hunter and what he's done so far in camp, but it's been really impressive in person to see him, a guy that I've often, read about, watched tape of, and seen from a distance over the years. But, all of 6'4", 200 pounds, and he's playing strong and tough so far, which has kind of always been the knock on him. And granted, it's against Ross Cockrell. Most of his reps have come against Cockrell, with Artie Burns trailing Antonio Brown all over the field. And he definitely has the size and leaping and athleticism advantage over Cockrell. That won't be the case in every matchup he faces, so we're going to learn a lot about him in the preseason. How does he get off press coverage for a big guy that's going to play mostly on the outside? That's huge, but he's been a real asset in the red zone so far, and he's done some impressive things there. And then I think the guy on the other side of the ball is Mike Hilton, the little nickel corner, with Senquez Golson hurt again, and Cameron Sutton also out. Hilton's got a lot of run in the slot, and he's been really impressive, really instinctive and quick and twitchy in zone coverage, gets his hands on the ball a lot, makes plays, just consistently makes plays despite being tiny, even matched up with some tight ends and made some plays. I don't expect him to be used heavily in that way moving forward, but he is a guy that is scrapped and has shown a lot of good instincts and a nose for the football so far, and whether it was in OTAs or mini camp and then now again into training camp. So I would say those are probably two guys that probably were not in most people's final 53 heading into camp that have made a really good case for themselves so far.
Yeah, and I had discussed a little bit about Mike Hilton just on the last episode, and I guess since then I saw reports, obviously I wasn't there, and then perhaps you were, that the most recent, what do you want to say, interaction with Mike Hilton is that he was holding, grabbing, and tugging at anything he could get his hands on, so I'm assuming that's what you meant by feisty.
Yeah, I think that he does play that way a little bit, but he's pretty technically sound. I actually thought he and Eli Rogers matched up the other day in one-on-ones, and I thought that Hilton actually got Rogers pushed off of Hilton twice for catches. I thought there was officials there that didn't call anything, but Hilton will set a physical tone, but he knows how to ride that line and not be super grabby, but be more just physical. And use his hands well, kind of jockey for position without being blatant in any type of, interference way. So I think I like that aspect of his game so far. If you're a guy like that, with, it's already going to be undersized in a lot of matchups that you're faced with, why not use everything you have to your advantage and, test out the officials, see what they'll call. But, I don't think he's like mugging people, but as a small guy, you can sometimes get away with that because, you're not going to be as physically overpowering when you do make contact, and sometimes the officials, they'll let it go unnoticed. So Hilton's crafty. I like that about him. And he got a nose for the football, and he's very crafty in his technique.
Yeah, in fact, the Zebras just showed up this week for camp. They've only been out there one or two times so far, and I wonder how much that annoys the players, to be honest. It sounds like there's some fun going back and forth because the referees are working on their craft as well. But just sticking with the corners as it is, we were saying the best availability or the best ability is availability. Screw that up. The best availability is ability. That's not what it is. But a lot of people we were going into this whole thing. I don't know that people necessarily were high on Ross Cockrell. We saw Cameron Sutton was drafted in the third round. A lot of people were really hyped to see what could Senquez Golson do. With these guys kind of on the shelf, you think that's more of an inroads for somebody like Mike Hilton to make this final 53-man roster?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, Golson has to be on the field. He has to be. Every day that he misses, it just becomes more imperative that he get back out there because he's barely even participated in camp over the last 2 years. So, his first year he got hurt before the padded practices even started. His second year it was probably one or two into the padded practices. And again this year. So a minor injury from what we're hearing so far. He should be back soon. He anticipates being back soon, yada, yada, yada. It all sounds nice, but he's got to be out here. Otherwise he doesn't have he might be a long shot to make the roster anyway at this point. If he isn't out there this year, he doesn't have a shot to make the roster. So he's got to be out there soon. And every day that he isn't, Hilton's kind of, closing that gap a little bit if there even is one anymore. And so, yeah, it's great. Obviously Sutton's going to have a spot on the roster. Willie Gay's going to have a spot on the roster. Cockrell, Artie Burns. So you're going to have four guys there. But, Hilton, I think you'd like a guy maybe a little more inside-outside versatility, but you'd rather take a guy that can do something well and play inside than not be able to do anything at all at a high level. So, Brian Allen's a guy that I think developmentally the team would love to do some things with him, a fifth-round pick. I just don't know whether, he's running with the third-team corners right now. I don't know whether he's going to be able to show enough to make a final spot on the roster. They may try and sneak him onto the practice squad. A big guy with great size and athleticism. Can they sneak him through as a fifth-round pick? Usually those guys clear waivers okay. He could be one of the rare exceptions that doesn't with his kind of his tangibles and his athletic profile. So you might run a risk there. We'll see how they play in the preseason. That should help us determine a lot. And more than anything, we'll see if Golson gets healthy because right now I think if I had to choose for the 53-man roster, I would say that Hilton's going to be the guy.
Yeah, as they say, availability is you can't make the club in the tub, right? So flipping on the other side of the ball, with Le'Veon not being at camp, the running backs are getting a lot more reps. Well, I guess that's not true because he probably would get very minimal reps. But who do you think is really taking advantage of it so far?
Yeah, I think that James Conner being hurt too. That's another thing because now Fitzgerald, Toussaint, and now Davis are getting they're splitting a lot of the first team reps. And to me, Toussaint has looked far better than Now Davis. I think he runs behind his pads more. I think Now Davis is more of an upright and kind of straight line runner, a little bit leggy in the way that he does things. Toussaint looks like he's in the best shape of his life, and he plays with a ton of energy, a ton of physicality. They know he can block. He's shown a willingness to block. Coach Tomlin loves his demeanor, loves what he brings to the table. He's a far more explosive route runner and a better route runner than Now Davis is. I think he's been superior in just about every way. He's not quite as big as Davis, but again, I like the way he runs behind his pads. And I think Davis runs a little bit upright, and he looks like he just looks like a guy with his best football behind him right now. And so right now, I would lean Fitzgerald Toussaint, and I think Tomlin really appreciates the fact that Toussaint comes to work every single day, and he knows his job. His job's been on the line for a couple of years now. He's hanging on to it, and I think that the Steelers would be really apt to trust him in the absence of one of their top two guys. If Connor or Bell were to go down, or both, or Connor would need to split reps with someone. I think Toussaint has a much better profile as a third down type of back that can do a little bit of everything. The reason Now Davis is here, though, kickoff returns. And by that reason, I mean that Now Davis is here not to fumble a kickoff return, because that consistently seems to be all the Steelers care about on their kickoff return units. I would aim a little bit higher. I don't think Now Davis gives you any breakaway ability or any upside at all to try and jumpstart a drive in enemy territory, or even closer to the 50. I think he's going to be a guy that consistently gets you out somewhere near the 20-25 yard line and doesn't fumble the ball and goes down to first contact, and then you're just going from there. And maybe that's all Pittsburgh wants with their offense. I would aim a little higher. I would look at some more explosive options, and they'll look at them certainly in the preseason. But if Now Davis is worse in all the other ways that I listed and makes the team just because he won't fumble a return or mess up a return, to me, I don't think that's the right way to address the roster construction of the team. So we'll see what direction the team ends up going in. But to me, Fitzgerald Toussaint's been the better back by far.
Yeah, I would agree. Before Connor got hurt, when we were out there at camp, he was showing some nice moves, and this was before pads went on. Do you think that as a rookie with his limited exposure, even though they're very familiar with him because he came from Pitt, is he equipped to take on that backup running position?
I think he is. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about a guy with plenty of experience in college, plenty of opportunities to carry the ball, also used in pass protection as a receiver, not an explosive route runner or anything like that. Not a guy who's going to get great separation, not really a super explosive runner, but certainly fast enough, runs behind his pads as well. And he's a big guy. Just the natural science of a man moving as fast as he can is going to create problems for defensive backs in terms of tackling if he gets into the secondary. So, he's just a smart guy, good vision. He ran an inside zone. They ran a Pitt. They also ran a lot of gap scheme stuff, similar scheme to the Steelers in some ways. So I think it's a seamless fit for him mentally. I think that he's just a good, solid back. I don't think he'll ever be a great starter in the NFL. But I think behind the Steelers offensive line, he has a shot to post some pretty solid production if Bell were to go down and the Steelers were to call upon Connor in a bigger role. I think he could keep that offense humming along just fine as long as the passing game's clicking like it always does.
Yeah, and you know what? I want to bring up the passing game too, because I get constantly berated for being a Landry Jones defender, of which I know you're not, so we're going to hear it straight on the show today. But we're talking a lot about the rookies and talking about the passing game. You have Jones now on the shelf with an abdominal injury. Don't know how many more sessions he may miss, but Josh Dobbs getting a very extended look, and then, of course, we're getting to see a lot more of Bart Houston, whether we want to or not. How do you feel about Dobbs as a fit here? I know a lot of people ask this question. They say, "Oh, well, is Dobbs going to beat out Landry as a backup?" And we didn't necessarily feel that way, at least not maybe this year. But I could tell you, at least, you could tell the difference in experience between Jones and then Dobbs and then even Houston. What are your feelings about Josh Dobbs?
Yeah, Landry Jones is definitely the number 2 quarterback. Dobbs had his best day on, I believe it was on Thursday, and he looked like he was more comfortable pushing the ball down the field. I think early on in camp, he was just kind of dumping it off, getting it out of his hand, trying to get in a rhythm, trying to get a good feel for things. There were some hiccups, some bad throws, some poor decisions, some hesitations to go down the field. He's had a little bit of everything. The goal line situations he struggled in. He's thrown some picks. But I think also you look at him and you say, this is a kid who is going to work his tail off to figure things out mentally. And I think right now the processing speed is a concern. But he has a pretty good arm. He throws with pretty good zip. I'd say he's generally accurate once he's in a rhythm. To me, Dobbs' ceiling is probably going to be a solid backup in the NFL. And he needs a lot of work to reach his ceiling. So there's a decent chance that he never gets there. No way in the world do I think he was worth a 4th-round pick for sure, especially when you consider, over the course of recent history since 2000, how many quarterbacks have been drafted. And I believe the number is 164 or something quarterbacks have been drafted in the last 17 years. And they've been drafted after the first round. And I think like 6 of those guys have started at least 30 games and have a winning record. So there's just, and 2 of those guys, one of them's like Quincy Carter in Dallas, who most of their fans would consider not a very good quarterback, and Matt Schaub's in that. And, obviously, you got the outliers. Everybody, and when you take a quarterback in the 4th round, everybody likes to point to Russell Wilson or Tom Brady or even Kirk Cousins to an extent. But those guys, the reason they're always get pointed to is that they're the only names that ever become good in that range of the draft. So if they drafted Dobbs to be a successor to Ben Roethlisberger, they're going to be sorely, sorely disappointed. If they drafted Dobbs to beat out Landry Jones for a backup spot, my question is why. Landry Jones has been completely fine as a backup, when he's been called upon. It just seems like a waste of a pick to me. 99% of the time, if a team has to go to their backup quarterback, they are not going to win the games that matter anyway. So, to me, it was a waste of a pick. I said that at the time. I'll continue to say that moving forward. But I think that, Dobbs can become a solid backup in the NFL. The Steelers just don't. They already have a solid backup. So it's kind of schematically, I don't see a problem with the fit. But roster-wise, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why they spent the pick on him. But I think he'll do fine, and I think he'll continue to progress just fine as we move forward.
Yeah, that's kind of where we were headed in that direction too, because we've constantly said, hey, Landry is not meant to be Big Ben's replacement, nor is Josh Dobbs, in our opinion, either. Right. And we were really only sold on Dobbs by one of our own little teammates here at SCU, Zach Celedonia. Who's really got the hype train going on not only Justin Hunter, but Josh Dobbs. And anytime he hears anything about Dobbs, I guess the one thing I was interested in was, I think, the 7 shots. Just the other day, I was reading, it was maybe 3 snaps that Dobbs had. There was one that was a touchdown pass to Grimble, maybe one other incomplete, and then the final one was one where he kind of scrambled and ran. And just from my observation from the previous week and having been there, I made the same observation about him making dump-offs and maybe holding on to the ball a little long. There was a strip sack, I think, by Anthony Chiquillo. So tell me a little bit maybe about that 7 shots. Did it look like, did Dobbs, was it like a play by design maybe, or was it his own smarts seeing the play break down, or maybe he had something and missed it?
They're all starting to run together in my head now, all the different 7 shots when you're at a lot of the practices. But I would say generally that there's been some decent decision making from him in that area of the field as the week is as the last couple of weeks have gone on. I think that his decision making has been better in that area of the field. Early on, he was just trying to squeeze it to his first read. Linebacker L.J. Fort picked him off. I think Wood had a pick 6 on him. He may have thrown multiple interceptions in the 7 shots drills early on, and then he's become a lot more comfortable moving through things a little bit. Nobody's going to hit you in these drills. Take your time, make your read, make your throw. Move through your progressions. I think getting him calmed down was the biggest thing. They open 7 shots is the first thing they do in the team session. Red zone, a lot of pressure right away. Compacted area anyway. You're not having a lot of levels to throw to. So you got to make decisions quick. Windows are smaller. And I think that for a rookie that thinks as much as Dobbs does, he is a hardcore thinker. I talked to Randy Fichtner the other day, and he was telling me Dobbs is just a thinker. He's this guy that is going to process things. He's going to beat himself up when he makes a mistake because he knows in his head what the progressions are, what things are. But then when it comes to actually doing it on the field, it's just a whole nother thing. So I think as he progresses in that way, and as he starts to get more and more comfortable and things become more and more natural to him, I think he has the upside to do a lot better in those situations. I think we've already seen that to a degree as the practices have moved on.
Yeah, I just didn't want the picture in my head of Michael Vick not being able to find anyone in the Steelers offense and then just trying to run with it. But it does appear Dobbs looks like a much better passer, at least at this stage the career versus where Michael Vick was at the end of his, and trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. But talking about Dobbs, talking about Sutton, we really don't have time to go over guys like TJ Watt or Juju Smith-Schuster, but 8 draft picks in 2017. We saw practically everyone make this roster in some form or fashion. The previous, almost the last few seasons, especially last year with 3 new rookie starters. Do you see most of the draft picks making this roster in some way, shape, or form for 2017?
Yeah, I think that I do. I mean, obviously, all your first 3-round guys are safe. Dobbs is safe, and Holba is safe. The only question marks are Brian Allen, who I think might be the biggest question mark, and Keon Adams. Both those guys are decent question marks. Allen, for the reasons I described before, right now he would make it, but that we have to see what Sutton does. We have to see what Golson does if he returns. There's only one cut down now, so these guys are going to have a longer opportunity to all kind of show what they can do, which is huge. So I think that Cody Sensabaugh, do they keep him as a special teamer? I think Brian Allen, they're going to have to try and sneak him through on the practice squad unless he plays really well in the preseason, which, like I said, he's running third-team corner. He's matching up against guys like Kane and Severn, who don't have a prayer making the team in Pittsburgh. So we haven't really – and I feel like he's been in for an inordinate amount of run play so far. So, and I even watched him closely yesterday or a couple days ago, and he really – it seemed like he was just in there, it was run play after run play, and he goes, great effort. He works for the ball, but I want to see him in coverage. I want to see, so his technique, but a big fluid dude. I think he could help him on special teams. Wouldn't surprise me if they keep him over Sensabaugh if he does play well. Just for that reason, you don't want to try and you can't. Sensabaugh doesn't have any practice squad eligibility. There's not going to be a lot of teams clamoring for him if you let him go anyway. And so I think that's his best path. I think he's got to really stand out on special teams and show something in the preseason games. And I think for Keon Adams, I think he looks like a really good 7th round pick. And it's a 7th round pick, and those guys are all basically undrafted free agents at that point, that type of ability. But Keon Adams just has a lot of moldable traits. He's really explosive. I think he's got some flexibility. He needs to get stronger probably, but he's not like physically dominated like Travis Feeney was a couple of years ago. Like that's not the case with Keon Adams so far. He's done some really good things. He plays very aggressive. I like a lot of things about Keon Adams. I think that he should be easily snuck onto the practice squad. So if that's the route they choose to go, right now the top 4 are set. It's going to be Chicklow and Watt behind Harrison and Dupree. They'll probably keep a 5th guy. Arthur Moats has been a leader, veteran, so it's going to be between those 2. But if Keon Adams really stands out in preseason, I really think they feel completely fine cutting Moats and keeping Keon Adams on the roster, because with his speed and tackling ability, there's special teams, potential there as well. So those are probably the 2 to match up. Watch Brian Allen, watch Cody Sensabaugh, and to some degree the other corners, and then watch Keon Adams and Arthur Moats and see if Keon Adams can flash it all. Because what you're getting in Moats. You're just getting an average player on his best day, and a guy who's aging at this point and doesn't have much upside. And the Steelers need pass rush upside, so Adams could have a chance of making the 53-man roster.
Cool. Now, I want to flip things up on you a little bit as we close it out, because we know your time is limited. But this week, the Steelers announced the Hall of Honor. And, of course, Everybody's been speculating who's going to go in, what's going to go in. So that's my final question for you. Who do you think, if you're on that committee with Labs and all the other guys, who are you putting in that first class?
How many go in the first class? I didn't even look. What's the criteria and how many get in that first class?
Yeah, they don't.
That's the question.
They don't have a number set. They didn't say it's only 5, it's only 10. But the only criteria that really follows up is they have to have the stats and they have to played for the Steelers for 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, they're good luck. How many? They have to be willing to put a lot in the first group, I think. I mean, why make this thing more complicated? All almost everybody on the 70s teams. There are a good number of them. I don't know how stingy they're going to be with something like that, but I mean, man, there's an incredible amount of potential. Name after name after name. Without a limitation at all to the amount of names that they put up on the or put in the hall, then I mean they're going to have a lot to work through, because obviously we're blessed to have an incredibly rich franchise history in Pittsburgh that can think about the consistency and the stability that's been going on for years and years here. They're going to have plenty of names to sort through, and I'm not sure how they're going to limit that count, even if they're on the first round of putting guys in.
Yeah, it's there's no doubt about it. An offshoot of that question, just because it's come up in my head recently. The Hall of Fame itself opened up its membership to a certain extent and to different areas. Do you think a guy like Bill Nunn gets consideration now?
I honestly have no idea. It's so hard because you're not in those meetings, you're not in those rooms, and I think that there's so much for those guys to consider. I say it every year that there's no way. You don't envy their jobs whatsoever, because there's so many names to sort through, and the question is less about whether guys deserve to be in the Hall of Fame and more about, do they deserve it more than somebody else? So I think that's the question they're going to have. I don't even know who's up for eligibility next year and all those different things. So there's so much for them to consider. I don't envy being in their situation at all, because there is a limit to the number of names that they, are allowed to include each and every year. And so because of that, I think that their jobs are incredibly hard, and it does become way less about sorting out whether a guy like Nunn or other people are deserving of a spot in there, and whether they're more deserving than someone else. And recency bias plays a part with even with older voters as well. Players that have done well more recently are more apt to stand out in their mind, than guys who are from further ago. So I think they have a really hard job, and it's very difficult for me to say, if is a player more deserving, or is he more deserving than someone else? It's really difficult for me to say.
Yeah, the long list. We didn't get any names, but that's okay, because we've been putting out our own articles over at steelcityunderground.com, and myself and Brian and maybe a few others will break down the Hall of Honor here in a future episode, because Lord knows we could take 2 hours on, at least 2 hours on just talking about everyone who is worthy. But we are worthy of your presence today, Jon Ledyard. Why don't you tell everyone that's listening? Yeah, I knew I was going to get a little chuckle out of you. Tell everyone where we can follow you and all of your exploits.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Ledyard NFL Draft. That's Ledyard NFL Draft. Yeah, if you guys follow me on there, you should be able to check out most of what I do. And yeah, check out Locked On Steelers podcast too, for you can never get enough Steelers content, right? And so there'll be some good stuff hopefully happening there as well. I got pods on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday going up. So, yeah, that's probably the best way and easiest way to find me. Thank you guys so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, and thank you. We certainly appreciate it, and you taking out your time. And, of course, folks, if you didn't catch that Twitter handle, just rewind it a little bit back and make sure you're following Jon, because he's got maybe the best coverage of camp before anyone puts out some other articles and whatnot and really break them down. But in the moment, you're going to want to follow Jon on Twitter. So thanks once again, Jon, for joining us. That was a pretty cool episode. Brian, I don't know. Do you have anything else for Jon?
No, just again, thanks very much. And I do encourage everybody to listen to the Locked On Steelers podcast, because Jon will definitely, as I've said, when I retweet your stuff, he'll definitely throw down some knowledge, and it's well worth the time.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you. So you heard it, folks. We're up against it. That was Jon Ledyard from just about everywhere you could imagine. Steel City Insider, all of the Locked On content. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. Until next time, my name's Joe. My other cohort's name is Brian. He's the host who doesn't like toast. Be safe. Be good. We'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.